And then fast forward almost a full decade now for me, for you, you've been hunting them longer,
Yep.
but with dogs, about a decade, about
Yep.
the same time. Where the disconnects were from like when we first started to now, like what are those lessons that we've learned to where like, okay, we probably put too much emphasis on this, not enough on that. Does anything kind of come to mind just on that initial question for you?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the sort of education and thinking and strategy. I mean, it's a constant evolution, and it's like sort of there's always seemingly for me there's always something kind of like at the forefront, sort of piquing my curiosity. And it seems like every season I'm kind of like focusing on something else, and all that stuff kind of adds up. It's like another layer, right? As an education should be. Like every year you go out and you spend another X amount of days in the woods. Like, what are you learning? I think for a long time for me, and there's clearly two distinct eras for Nick, which is pre-bird dog, post-bird dog. So before, and I've talked about this many times on my show, like I hunted grouse a long time just as a walking through the woods with me solo or with friends or whatever. And back then, I mean, there's no Onyx. We're not, I'm a 16-year-old kid or whatever. Like I'm not using a plat book. Like the way the laws and stuff are in Minnesota, you can hunt unposted private land. I don't even know if I very rarely actually hunt private land. There's some industry land that maybe you hunt from time to time, but
And that's in Minnesota. You can hunt
you can
unposted
hunt
private.
unposted
Okay,
private
I don't
land
think I
in
knew
the
that.
northern portion of the state. It's been a few years since I've looked this up, but basically it's if you're in the, where you're hunting ruffed grouse primarily, if it's not posted, you can hunt it. But again, today I think it's less relevant just because most people are using OnX. You know where the public land
Right.
is, and that's where most of the good grouse cover is. But point of me saying that is like we would just kind of hunt any sort of. We'd be driving around these areas that I still hunt today, but you're driving around just looking for like a trail or something that doesn't have a no hunting sign or no trespassing. And by and large, we were probably 99.9% of the time on public land. But we would focus on trails because like that what an easy thing to do, right?
Right.
Like you got your hiking boots on and your remember Remington 870, and me and my buddy were walking down a trail.
So you guys started with an 870 too?
My
Okay.
first my first shotgun was a youth model 870 Express. Yeah, I think I killed my first grouse ever with a like a lot of people a little break action hammer gun, single shot. It was my cousin's gun. Then shortly thereafter, I got my Remington 870, and I used that for a long time until I think the next gun I got. Well, then I got a 12 gauge Browning BPS, and because I thought I needed a 12 gauge. I'm old, grown up now, like I need a
Yeah.
12 gauge. So I hunted
Fancy.
with
Yeah.
that for a long time, and then I got a Browning Satori. That was my first double gun, but that goes into the second era with bird dogs and double guns and all that kind of stuff. But we just like I learned a lot in those years hunting and trail walking and stuff, but I really I learned I learned everything by accident. Like I'd walk the same trails, not every day, but we'd walk the same trails over and over again, and you do that enough and eventually you flush a grouse off that same corner a number of times where you're like, "Oh." And I was so far from like even looking at a tree and saying, "Oh, that's an aspen tree," or "That's hazelbrush." I didn't identify anything. It was just that is grousey. Like it was just this pattern that sort of my brain and from time and repetition and experience established as that looking like grousey cover. Now I know, like basically I was looking at aspen, alders, hazelbrush, all the things that I talk about now, and I look at and I name and I identify. But I didn't think anything more of it than we flush a grouse on this corner every time we walk by here. And so I think that really gave me a foundation of like these deep rooted patterns of like what does grouse cover look like in these areas that I hunt. And I have that. And fast forwarding now to where I have taken an interest in species identification of trees and vegetation and food, and paying more attention to food and cover. What are they eating and looking on the ground? And I'll just, a name it. I'll just say it in my head. Like I look at something, name it, identify it. And I kind of have fun with it, but I also think that kind of like you're creating these thoughts and these things in your head that you can sort of look back on, and then you take that to another area, and then okay, I can see the hazelbrush here, I can see the 10-year-old aspen cut here. I'm way more I use a lot more information and data now because we have it available to us. It's just it wasn't available, and
Right.
it wasn't as easily accessible. Now, like that kind of stuff adds a whole other layer of complexity. It's there if you want it. You don't need it. You don't have to look into it or pay attention to it, but I use it a lot. And that's when it comes to like cover, like scouting and finding new places to hunt, that's where it all kind of starts for me. Other than just in the woods going for a walk, that's
Well, it's really interesting because that's, just identifying the species. You and I have talked about it a number of
yep,
times over the years, and it's something that I really appreciate and I nerd out on. What I've come to find throughout the years, and this might be a byproduct of how much traveling I do
yep,
to so many different places, because I go about it the same way. I have the same app, the picture this app, like,
yeah,
identifying it and just piecing the patterns together. But what I've found is that throughout the years, I will learn it, I download that information, and then I leave and go back home for a year essentially. And then when I come back up here, I can't recall the bulk of the names that I learned,
yeah,
but I still have the intuition of that's grouse cover. And so it's like it takes me a few days to get. I mean, I remember, the basics, the
yeah.
hazel, the
You
aspen,
know
the
when you're
main
looking
thing.
at an
I know
aspen
I know
tree.
what I'm looking at, but I also, to your point, being able to put the name on it, it not only helps me, like, kind of catalog everything in my brain, but also when we are communicating to people and
Yep.
listeners and doing a podcast, it does help that to where it does kind of give some people to where they can Google image search a plant species of whatever. But it is interesting that, like, you go back 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have been like, man, that's like one of the most important things I'm on right now. And I'm every year I'm getting more and more comfortable recognizing and realizing that, like, it goes in my brain and then it falls out of my brain and then I relearn it
Yeah.
come next year when it's time to cram for that test again,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to where your point is you can kind of go into it as deep as you want
Yeah.
and overanalyze it if you want, but it's not completely necessary, especially if you have enough experience, like you said, that corner to where you can picture it enough to where when you're walking through the woods you can recognize it, like that's worth checking out, that's worth sending a dog in.
Yeah.
To where I think, in the past when you and I've been nerding out on it, I think a lot of people are like, I don't know any of these names,
Yep.
like, I don't do I need to know that for grouse hunting? And the answer is no, you don't. You just need more time in the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.